Hiya, good morning, hello, morena or kia ora if you're in New Zealand, but also welcome to those from further abroad. So I really, a big thank you to Ryan and Laura first for putting on the event and continuing with the Zoom sessions. I was a little bit wary of what that might feel like, so it's in some ways it's quite good. I can't see you all, so I'm just going to be looking at my screen and taking you through it and making sure I try and look into the camera so it feels like I've got some eyes on you. But to kick us off, I'm just going to play, and hopefully it does all work. Tech checks have been good and then bad, and it's only due to user error that they've been bad, but I want to kick off with a little video just to get you in my mindset, I guess, and see where I'm coming from. Let's see if this is going to work. Okay, explanation probably for a few of you, you might not know that show, but I'm definitely a child of the 70s, and that show actually just had this profound impact on me living in a very small town in New Zealand, a little town called Inglewood. So when the show like that came on, it just sort of blew my mind. It sort of opened the whole world. There was a giant city. There was this young woman venturing into her exciting new world. She had a next door neighbor. She had a great apartment. I think the apartment made me go, that could be my future. It was just so stylish. The whole show was very stylish. I mean, the graphics feel old now, but they were just so cutting edge at the time. So yeah, as I say, that was, I guess, a window into the future. I could kind of see what might be possible. And as a young woman, she definitely was working and living in a very male-dominated industry. She was a reporter for a news show, and in lots of ways that they use sort of humour to actually really highlight some of those inequalities that were existing. And while she kind of floundered and she was sometimes a bit of a dick or very uncool, and I actually thought that's great too, because this is an imperfect journey. So yeah, I was very inspired by her and that show. Just bear with me while I actually try and unshare and then share again so I can move on. Just 1 minute. Not having, oh, there we go.
I don't think Zoom ever gets
there,
right?
Sorry. Sorry about that. It was technical difficulties. Are we back?
No, it's gone black, Janelle. I think you need to go full screen before you share it. So if you stop and then.
Sorry.
No, you're all right. Screen sharing in Zoom should be much easier by now, considering how much we all use it, but it absolutely isn't. Beautiful.
Okay. Sorry, guys. Not seamless, was it? Anyway, so the subject landed, and thank you, Laura. That was a much better description of it, and certainly where I've got to once I've done a lot of delving into the subject. So obviously, yes, the underdog is apparently a person who is not favoured to win. Usually in sport or, you know, definitely in business. And I guess this made me think a lot about, that's the perception from the outside world, you know, a measurement of what an underdog is. And I thought it might be interesting to really delve into, how does the underdog feel? Like, what is that going on inside your own self-perception? And so you'll see my little Monsters Inc. character there, Mike Wazowski. The great thing about having a child actually is that you watch an awful lot of animated feature films, and this character in Monsters Inc., if you're not familiar, really does sum up the underdog character. He just has this beautiful sort of naive energy, and you know, he's got these goals and he believes anything is possible, and even when, you know, situations, experiences around him kind of show him that he is a bit of the loser, he himself just strives on and carries on. And I think, you know, like, I just found that so endearing as a character to watch, and probably saw a bit of myself in there. And I think the underdog requires a little bit of aloofness, or definitely stubbornness. Like, you just have to have your mission, your vision of what you're going to do, and you just actually have to keep going.
8:30 a.m.
And it's important that you ignore the naysayers along the way. That's probably a vital thing for an underdog. You can certainly listen to some opinions and things, but if there's naysayers, you must push on. Oh, hand tool, hang on. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little bit of a backstory, just to give you an idea of where I'm from. I think, as Laura, you said, it's important to know where you come from. So I was born here under that very scribbly mountain, Mount Egmont it was when I was born, now Mount Taranaki. It is in the North Island of New Zealand, for those of you from outside our country. So yeah, I was born there in 1970, actually born in New Plymouth. And I'm actually even considering that I was born into the underdog country, New Zealand. But I realise that that's probably a big topic for another time. But definitely we're in the middle of nowhere down here, and always seem to be punching well above our weight as a little nation. So I arrived as a writhing, wriggling baby. I arrived into the world. I was so active when I was first born, and trying to lift my head up, which is quite unusual for a baby, almost thinking I might sit up, that my mum, she was really nervous, and she asked the doctor, you know, like, is she okay? Like, actually just going, is she all there, or is she going to be okay? The doctor laughed and just said to her, yes, I think she's fine. I think she's excited to be here in the world. And I guess that really does say a lot about me. My mum has always described me as a very sort of coiled spring, you know, just this kind of constant energy. I think that potentially made me a tricky child. I was a full-on child, very curious, chatty at home, but super shy in public. I would hide behind my mum or just be very reserved. Often just really sort of watching all this, the situation around me, people talking, very interested in what they had to say, watching their behaviour, their relationship interactions. And that is nothing new. There's a part of me still now that is actually quite shy, and I'll often be in a public situation and really just want to stand back and sort of weigh it up before I feel confident to launch in. Okay, so there's a few little stories here just to share with you. And one is that my mum and dad owned a 4 Square store in New Plymouth for a while. For those of you outside the country, that's like a 7-Eleven type idea. Anyway, as a young child on the back of the car, I really noticed this logo on the building and this illustration of this character. And probably it's my first kind of design creative experience, or sort of brand as we call it now. But anyway, the character, this male character, very smiley, and at the time, before he was redrawn, he had this black quiff, and my dad had a black quiff, and he had a round smiley face. And as a small child, I thought, that's my dad, you know, they had a 4 Square and that's him. And then beautifully, as you travel around the country or even in your own hometown, you just keep driving past these 4 Squares. And in my mind, I had built this thing that obviously my mum and dad owned the empire of 4 Square. Like, we must own all these stores. But I never said anything. I never shared that thought until much, much later, which my dad finds totally endearing. But yeah, I just love the idea that you know, like this underdog character builds a perception of themselves and their place in the world, and it's actually quite large, even if people from the outside think that they are a little bit of a loser and not going to make it. So yeah, that's that part of the story. Let's see if my little arrow keys will work. No. As I said, in 1976, my parents decided to leave New Plymouth, where I was born, and move to Inglewood, a tiny town, about 25 minutes drive from New Plymouth. So we left our very small city, but city suburban life, and moved to this very tiny farming community. They bought this really old house. It was over 100 years old, actually hadn't had any humans in it for 4 or 5 years, so very run down. And we lived in a caravan outside of that. Now that might be considered a grand designs experience, but it was definitely, you know, like you sort of, you did it hard. There were 3 children. My parents worked incredibly hard. They were both sales reps. So they did that job. They ran a farm of animals, 25 acres with sheep and pigs and goats, a dog, a cat, and horses, which was to become my absolute love as a child. I was very lucky in that way. So it was an idyllic childhood in my younger years. You know, I could really live that very sort of naive, just, you know, very open and just adoring of the world around me. And yeah, I just found this really interesting dynamic. Like, when we first moved there, we were considered absolute freaks, you know, to buy this small property and be kind of townies, and and they could just never understand it. I mean, it's very common now, lifestyle blocks and people moving and just having a few acres, but back then in the 70s it was very unusual. Most of the farms around us were large dairy farms. Yeah, so they were quite scathing. They were very curious about us as well, though, and I just carried on, even though no one talked to us on the school bus for months. I just carried on in this kind of naive wonder world. And I was a really small child. I was really short and little, super sporty and creative. And I really loved my sort of individual pursuits. So that was really horse riding and swimming. And one little story my mum reminds me of, actually, I did a lot of interviewing of her for this, just to remind me of stories, was as a school child, there was a school swimming sports, and so she turned up. She worked part-time as a sales rep, which meant that she could actually join us for lots of school activities. So she came along to the sports day, swimming sports, and the freestyle race came, and it came and went, and she thought, that's weird, she's not in that race. And then they announced over the mic that the butterfly race was going to happen. And there she was looking down at me as I climbed up to the box to dive in, and she thought, I don't think you know how to do butterfly. And she thought, well, okay. And so the starter gun went, and I hopped, and obviously the rest of the pool actually knew how to do butterfly and sort of just sprinted down the pool. But I just sort of dived in, then stood up. For a swimmer, this was terrible, but I actually didn't like water on my eyelashes, which is bizarre. But I would dive down, I would stop, stand up, use my fingers to dry my eyelashes, and then do another semi-butterfly dive, but not really. And the teachers patiently waited for me to finish this race, which must have taken a while. But when I reached the end of the pool, my mum said I sort of looked up at her, and I was just beaming, smiling, like, I've made it, I just did a length of butterfly. Anyway, so I grabbed my towel and went up to her, and then she said, why didn't you do the freestyle race? And I went, oh, well, because I know how to do freestyle. So see you, Marlo. There again, my mum was like, this young child is something, because she just takes on something she's got no idea in public view, like at the school sports. So we had a really good chuckle about that again recently. So generally my primary school years were actually quite positive, as I say, living in this idyllic wonderland. And then there was this move to high school, which I found quite a huge transition. Again, I was quite little. I was very young at high school. I was sort of 12 when I started, didn't have my birthday till later. Everyone seemed very big, quite sophisticated. And it was that real sort of jolt into reality, almost that the childhood is over and now you're entering a much more adult world. I didn't particularly love high school. First few years were quite a lot of bullying. Sort of, as a small person, I had the situation where you're hung on a coat peg and sort of left there because you're little. And it wasn't until I really got into my kind of sixth form year and seventh form, which is sort of 12, 13, that I could really craft my education just mostly around English and art history. And that made me very happy. I was I just adored going to school every day and just living in this real art subject world. My art teacher, though, was a super conservative older guy. I mean, he was probably 40. I thought he was about 60 at the time, obviously, being young. And he told my parents that I should really think about something else. Like, I really didn't have what it took to be an artist. And in some ways, I'm not too critical of him. He only knew what he knew, and he's probably right. I'm not going to be a famous painter or artist in that way. And even back then in this small town, I actually didn't even know graphic design existed as a career. So, I pursued it. My mum was definitely not deterred. She always believed that if you pursue what you really want to do, success will come. It may come slowly, but it will always come. You will give it everything you've got. And I agree with that. I think that's what I did. I just carried on. I sort of ignored him. And I had this great little studio space at the back of our art room. And that was probably another learning that studio space for a creative, a permanent place for mess, and being in the middle of projects and being able to leave it and come back and it's exactly as you left it, has stayed as a really important idea for me. So yeah, so I did high school. Typically, I'm always daunted starting something. Then I get comfortable. I don't want to get out of it. So my mum laughed as a seventh form finisher. I didn't actually want to leave there. I was really comfortable. Everyone had made plans. They were going to go to university. And I really thought, I don't know what I want to do. And I thought maybe I'll just sort of work for a year. I don't remember it being called gap year then. But so I thought, yeah, I'll work. Like I'd done relief milking cows, and I had done fleece sewing, which is, just folding the fleeces as they come off the sheep. And I thought, I might do bits and pieces like that. But sure enough, about a month passed over our summer holiday, and I just freaked out that I was missing out. Everyone was going, and I wasn't going anywhere. So I was a very late enrolment to the University of Waikato, which you can see a very deformed logo down there. I placed that on purpose, to be honest. I went online to find the logo and I saw this and I thought, this is typical for a designer where so much work might go into a logo, and I see this is actually available online, this sort of compressed logo, and I felt for the designer there. I thought, this is what happens to some of our work. It's excruciating. Anyway, so I popped it in there. And yeah, Waikato University. So that sits in Hamilton, which is just south of Auckland. And my mum drove me up there. We were a late enrolment. I looked around and chose my subjects, and they were unusual, mostly around an arts degree. I didn't think I was going to actually stay at university, but so I chose the most unusual subjects, and one of those was medieval history, which is hysterical really, because I'd never studied history, and I also had no idea about medieval times. So, there is that little Mike Wazowski character again going, oh, that looks interesting. I think I'll do that. Of course, I was a complete failure because I didn't actually know what anyone was talking about most of the time. So I had to drop that subject after the first semester because I was just flailing around. And I replaced it with a creative writing course, which really was a much better option. And I also took women's studies there. And during the 80s, that was a very feisty time for feminists, and particularly in the area of education. And so I didn't know a lot about feminism, but I really resonated with what they had to say. And of course, I'd been kind of watching what had happened at school, being a young woman and living on a farm where we were very active. And because there were no brothers, we'd actually done everything on the farm, just lifted things, wheeled wheelbarrows around. And at school, I'd often found this thing of never being asked to lift the seating for a school assembly, and I was thinking, that's weird, all the boys are doing it, I can lift a chair. So once I got to university, and there was obviously much more to discuss, this inequality, I really did learn a lot there. So while I wasn't a great university student, there's always something to be gained from any experience, even if it's not particularly positive at the time. There's always something in those experiences. I met some really great women and some adult students there who were obviously just excelling, late starters to university. They'd raised children, they'd really not done much high school, and they just absolutely soaked up the environment, and I really loved being around their enthusiasm. Anyway, during that year, I met a woman. She used to come down from Auckland for weekends. She was my flatmate's girlfriend, and she was super hip. She worked for a fashion magazine in Auckland as the art director, and I just thought she was so cool. I just wished I was, going to be as cool as her one day. But she was brilliant and helped me get my portfolio together, and and I went to Waikato Polytechnic. No logo there. That school is, I think it might have become a combined Polytech. But anyway, I started a design diploma course there, and I just finally felt really good in education. I was back like I felt in my art class, just doing subjects that I adored, and I definitely met my tribe of people and really loved my time there. So about halfway during the second year, I had the opportunity to get a job. Obviously, this is late 80s, and New Zealand was experiencing a recession off the back of the stock market crash. And so it felt kind of desperate, and I leapt at that chance for that job. I had really reached the marks I needed to pass the diploma by then, so and my tutors were very encouraging that I took that job offer. So it was for a small ad agency in Hamilton. And I guess there's another little learning there, that that employer obviously wanted, you know, the cheap graduate, but actually wanted me to be a senior designer. And so those two things were a little bit out of sync. And I was completely overwhelmed there. I got there, I was very excited and I wanted to make it work, but the expectation was just way too high. And so I gave it everything I had, but it ended badly. I mean, I was basically at a breakdown and was carried out of the studio. So just not something you want to have happen. So it was a pause, I guess, and a chance to sort of re-energize and get back on track. You know, like you really just fall into this hole and think you can't be creative anymore, that you've failed. So I did. I took a little bit of time out, and then I traveled. And my mum had recently separated from my dad. I think the stock market crash and its impact on the country was really the final straw for my parents, and so she separated from my dad, and she was really between jobs, not sure what she wanted to do, and wanted to travel. So we set off traveling together. We went to Canada, then we went over to the UK, and we traveled around Europe. And she left me at that point and returned home. And I worked in the UK, in London. Through just sheer determination, again, this underdog spirit, it was revived through travel, and travel is often a really great time for sort of refreshing. I was young, I was 21, and the world just got really, really big. I think I traveled around Europe with my eyes sort of as big as saucers, and I was an absolute sponge for everything I saw. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was seeing all the things in my art history books that were black and white, small photos, and then suddenly they were right in front of me. And that actually did blow me away. I couldn't believe I was there. You know, it was a pinch me moment. This little underdog from Inglewood was in Europe and wandering around the streets. So we came back to London. As I said, my mum returned home, and I initially got a job nannying. Again, London was experiencing a time of recession. They had really closed down their view of employing people from outside the country. They wanted to give people from the UK jobs, which I totally understood. So initially I went nannying, but I got a job interview just by sheer determination. I actually just harassed a recruitment agent. I would call her at 9:15 every Monday morning to see if there was a job. And I just did that relentlessly for months, and probably just through sheer fatigue, she finally rang me to say I had a job interview. So that was brilliant. And so I took the train and I went for my job interview. And while I was there, I was so, you know, hungry to work. I said to this potential employer, you know, I can work for free. So, you know, like I just want to work as a designer, but I can work for free. and of course this was not possible. I didn't have any money behind me, and I certainly hadn't saved a lot of money nannying. And he thought that this was really endearing. He'd never met anyone like it, with this just absolute desire to work. So he knew I couldn't work for free anyway. So he employed me and paid me, and I started working there. And that was an incredible experience, because it was working on publishing international books and promotion of books. And I had a great production manager who really had such an eagle eye for any little mistake and things like that. And I really crafted that eye with my work. So I have a little bit of an eagle eye myself. Often discuss that I can see something at 100 paces. But so yeah, so that was good. I met a man there and got married at 23. I looked about 18. I was just such a baby. And anyway, along the way we returned home, and I moved to Wellington and got a job there for a marketing comms company as a junior designer, and I loved my time there. It was mad. There was a couple that owned it, and they were completely stressed out all the time. And as a young person, you're going, God, you know, like almost don't want to end up being an adult like that, because I was so stressed. And of course that resonates now, and becoming, you know, later on being a couple and running a studio and stressed out most of the time. So it makes me smile now. But at the time we were a very young studio, and we were young, we worked so hard, and we played even harder. And from there, I got the opportunity to go to a bigger studio in Auckland and work for Dave Clark Design. That was, again, another giant leap for me. I entered a studio that was really structured, had big clients, and for New Zealand scale, it was a big studio. Lots of the designers had studied together and had been working to this very structured formula, probably called design thinking now, but you know, that's what they were operating and working for these quite big clients. So that was a really positive experience there. I just worked so much. Actually, everyone worked there. There was a mattress under someone's desk. They slept there often. But again, we were a young crew. We were given such a lot of freedom, and we just worked hard together and enjoyed our time, although there were a number of dramas and tears along the way. From there, I had the opportunity to move back to Wellington and actually help open Dave Clark Design Wellington with another woman, Angela, that worked for Dave Clark. And so we set out as these two young women, opening a startup studio office, a satellite office in Wellington. And that was an incredible experience. That was, you know, daunting. But again, you know, this Mike Wazowski character came back, and we just thought we could do it. We just didn't have too many doubts. We had a lot of tears. We got a little bit overwhelmed a lot of the time, but we sort of cried together. So that sort of got us through it. And yeah, that was a really great time. And we built a team. And of course, I ended up more sort of recruiting and managing a team. And after a while, I realized that I just absolutely missed being a designer on the tools. I really missed that. There was a lot of administration or art directing which was going on, which I loved, but I really just missed being a designer. So a job came up, and it was with a studio that I'd admired for a long time, called DNA, and had a really well-known creative director who I really wanted to work with. I felt I needed that kind of mentorship. I needed to learn. Again, I felt like I'd got to as far as I could go, and I really needed a next step. So the whole idea of the subject of underdog has made me ask the question, you know, like, are you born an underdog, or are you made an underdog via life experience, or just experiences, you know, some hardship, things that you've had to actually get through, get over. So I guess that's what I've really thought. I've gone back through my life and I've looked at experiences and things that influenced me, and I'm trying to answer that question. just for myself. So I'm going to show you some little images, and they're people, characters that have really influenced me, have made me consider that underdog position. So, not that you can really see these images, I kind of like the inverse. It's such a throwback to the 90s. I used to do this in my work all the time. I loved inverse. It was Photoshop's best tool. Anyway, so on the left-hand side there is at the beginning, this is my idyllic childhood, of course. I'm on the right there, the little one, a little pony with my sister Lee on Bronze Beauty. It was its show name. This was the idyllic life. This was where I had a very free, open, naive, almost love of the world. I trusted the world. I sort of trusted what it presented. And obviously, as you know, you leave childhood, and during my high school years, there were just such a lot of situations that really were, you know, the end of childhood. Some really, you know, some quite terrible situations that happened that made me go, I just suddenly distrust the world. Don't accept everything at face value. There are undercurrents, there are hidden agendas, there are people who will pull you down. And so that was that sort of jolt that I said at high school, you know, a jolt that took me into adulthood. On the right hand side, inversed, is Boy George. When I was about 11 or 12, I saw a poster of Boy George. I just could not believe how beautiful he was. The makeup, this absolutely unusual fashion. It's probably given my just interest in fashion, and obviously the music, but it was more to do with how beautiful a man could look in kind of dresses and makeup, and I just adored that. I read his biography at the time, and obviously learned he was gay. I didn't actually really know what gay was, to be honest. I'd heard some real homophobic comments in a farming community, nothing positive, of course. And so this was really a curious area for me to sort of to know more about, and this really free expression I loved. In the middle, you definitely, unless you're a Kiwi my age, this is an inverse of an image from a TV series that was made in New Zealand in the 80s called Gloss. And Gloss was about a fashion magazine and run by women, and obviously all the terrible dramas and bitchiness that went on. But on the right hand side of this image was this beautiful, striking woman who was the art director. And she, during one episode that I watched, she was leaning over a light box and she was marking up imagery from a photo shoot and sort of selecting cover images. And that moment, I really just sat there, this small town girl, looking at this going, I want to be her. I want to be that person. And I didn't consider how hard that was going to be. I just saw her and I just thought, that's what I'm going to do. That's going to be me. So, you know, that underdog spirit sort of does have no doubt that they will kind of get there. Let's move to sort of now where, you know, I turned 50 this year, and it's been a really sort of pause for thought, and it's made me think back, particularly with the subject in mind, about, you know, like, are you born or made an underdog? The image and caption on the right is a card from a friend of mine, Kate, for my birthday. And to be honest, I don't think anyone summed me up so well. I was just completely nailed by this card. As you know, the top part is the, you know, the naive, I love the world, I'm very curious about the world. And then there's this little bit of go fuck yourself, which is, you know, when I'm at my best and I can ignore the naysayers and just the internal doubt, I am definitely a little go fuck yourself. And just the hand goes out and it's like, quieten down the noise and just pursue your path and your direction. Which brings us to Creature, you know, the beginning of Creature. Obviously, when I was at DNA and I went through a tough time there, my marriage ended, and I met Tim, a guy who was working at DNA, and he was such a different man to meet. I'd come from quite a abusive relationship, sort of not really, a little bit physical, but not much, but mostly emotional torture. And I'd sort of lost myself in that. And then I had a really tough culture at DNA, didn't quite fit there. And then along came this man who was just so different and so interesting, just a brain the size of the planet, just knew so much about so many things. But had never travelled, and so we ended up travelling together. And after we came back, we weren't quite sure what we were going to do, and we decided, you know, should we set up a business? My mum was very pro that idea. She had always thought I should have started my own thing much sooner. I just lacked the confidence, to be honest, to do it, and that self-belief. I thought, I'm just that little girl from Inglewood. I can't do it. These are all smart people that own design businesses, and I just, I doubted myself. Anyway, so she gave us $10,000 to seed our startup studio, which was just incredible, and I really am grateful for that start. Very lucky to have such a supporter, a cheerleader. And so anyway, Creature was born. And I do think that Creature, the studio, was born an Underdog. We both, Tim and I, had various success and hard times during our time in the creative industry. And we set out with the idea of creating work for the arts. Tim had a lot of musician friends. There were a lot of people putting on small jazz festivals. And that's where we knew we wanted to work. We felt like the arts in New Zealand needed people to sort of lift the promotion of their events, to share the joy, the work, the craft, and make sure that audiences came and experienced that. And so for that, they needed better design, stronger marketing, etc., etc. So that's how that studio was born. And in amongst this time of Creature, which is about to celebrate, I think we're going to go into our 17th year this year. Obviously a business of ups and downs like most businesses, but we're really fortunate that we're still here. And even though we've shrunk right back to our original scale, which is just Tim and myself, I'm very lucky to still be creating, and I'm really glad that we do that under that Creature banner. During our 17 years, or nearly 17 years, we also managed to squeak in creating our own little creature, Marlo. We had a baby boy, which is probably the most rewarding and definitely challenging creative project of our lives, and is an ongoing project, of course. And I am thankful for that too, that happened. I wasn't going to have children, and then we decided we might give it a go. But it definitely has shaped me, like most experiences. I was always okay with the fact I wouldn't have children and wanted a very full creative life. Now that this has happened, I think it has balanced out to a sort of workaholic, obsessive creative, because something else needed so much attention and so much giving rather than just clients all the time. Anyway, should we just go to questions if there are some before people go to work?
I think let's do questions, and then let's put up your socials and people can get in touch directly to discuss your work in more detail.
Yeah.
So with questions, we had a great one from Nika, which was quite early on in your talk. They asked, how do you hold on to the spirit of jumping in with both feet into things that you have no idea about but are interested in? And then the follow-up to that is it easy dropping it or giving up on it without guilt or shame associated with feeling of failure?
Oh yeah, okay, good questions. I guess that's why I think part of me was born with this underdog spirit. I constantly have this thing of, I think there's a comedian, I can't remember her name, someone will remember, that goes, I can do that. And so I guess the swimming story shows you that without any experience, I will actually leap in. I will nearly drown to take something on. And every time something comes in, I do actually think I can do that. Anything creative, absolutely anything. I think, oh, I can do that. So I do have that self-belief and I do give it everything. It's not to say that I wouldn't go out and gather information or learn, or, you know, once Google arrived, it's amazing what you can learn quickly. But, you know, if a client asks me, you know, can you do that? I pretty much say yes, and I'm not even faking it. I actually inside think, well, yeah, sure, I can do that. I might have to find something else out. I might have to gather some other people around me, but I can do it. The second part of the question is, astrologically, I am a Taurian dog, and so that's why the underdog means so much to me. But as a Taurian dog, I can really hang on, and I hang on to something bad way too long. So I'm not sure what I fear. Is it a failure, the shame, or I actually feel like I hang on to sort of make something right, that I can make it better, we'll work it out. Sometimes things need time, but I actually wish I had let go sooner. Obviously, I wish I'd let go of a marriage sooner when it wasn't right, that it was destroying me, that I actually let go. But I realized that you do face a lot of naysayers, aggression. When I ended my marriage, people, you know, there was a lot of shaming around me. And so, yeah, there are consequences of letting go, and maybe that's also what I fear is the judgment. So, yeah, it's difficult, but worth doing still, and worth weighing up, I guess, all the time. Is this good for me? Should I be doing something else? So I'm probably not the expert there, because as I say, I hang on way too long. Eventually I give up, or something gives up on me, and then I really fall into a deep hole for a while, for sure. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And we had that other question, which you already answered, around perseverance, which I believe wraps up the questions that we have from the audience. Everyone's just saying thank you so much for sharing it. Oh, no, we have one more. So I'm just going to reiterate to people, if you do need to go to work, feel free to leave. These are being recorded. But we do have one more question, our last question from James, which is, what is your first step in your creative approach?
First step is, obviously there's a brief. So, you know, the first step for me is really listening. I know it can be difficult sometimes in a client meeting. You feel like you need to perform, you're there as the creative. But my first thing is really to observe the client, and maybe there's several of them, and really listen intently to what they're saying. And obviously you're taking notes and things, but you're listening for the in-between things that they say. You might ask questions of them. After that, I'll really think about that a lot, and I really try and put myself into the shoes of their consumer. There might be an internal comms things of their people, and try and imagine what it feels like to be in those shoes. So, I mean, I've realized that if you are actually, you are that subject, as in if the clients, customers are your age and really are you, it's so much faster, because you can go, yes, I totally understand that. But if it's right outside your sphere, you know, for example, you're a young designer and you're working on old age care, you're going to have to tap into your grandparents and tap into how it would feel, might feel like at the end of your life. You know, in your later years, what would you be looking for? So it's really important to listen really hard, and then hop in those shoes and just feel what that might be like, and then research, you know, go and find out a little bit about it, read articles and things like that. And that's really what I do before I start thinking I've got the answer for something. there is no answer to the thing until you've really gone through it. And it's important, while you might have a great idea, write it down, draw it, and then forget about it for a while and do the work, and then come back and see if that idea actually is still right for the project.